Of a costume drama, as it were.
That wasn't very material. It didn't do too well. It did all right, but it didn't do well. Yes, as you say, in the box office um, considerations of box office at that time, it didn't do very well. But what I wanted to say is that there was a bit of a comical man. He had a sense of humor, and it was very gentle and very subtle. That could be seen or detected somewhere in his treatment. And personally, a lot of sensitivity of his personality and inner chemistry as an individual reflected in his work.
Was he demonstrative at all, or did he sort of just work in whispers and not give himself too much?
Surprisingly quiet, surprisingly. And yet he managed to get precisely what he wanted from his actors. Sometimes it really didn't matter if they were a little imprecise also. But that depended upon the importance of the character. I was quite surprised. So often I found that his communication was very minimal. In terms of character, he would encourage everybody to get under the skin of the character by recounting phases and portions of stories and the script. But he was very brief in his address, not demonstrative as most of the directors are. They would act and overact and do all sorts of things to infuse the spirit. Not so with Bimal. I mean, it wasn't with just selected artists, but even with a person who was doing a bit role and obviously needed a lot of guidance. His guidance was minimal, and yet he managed to get it. I think the secret lay in his casting. He gave a lot of importance to casting, and having cast certain individuals, I think he did go and examine how that person could render those lines the way he wanted, or the way the script demanded or desired. He was, I would say, that one of the quietest men on the set. Even his process of his shooting was very quiet. There wasn't the hustle and bustle that you see in a studio. The lighting men would address to each other in soft whispers, and they could be heard because there was a general quietude.
Was he a director who matched your own personality? Was he a director after your own heart?
Yeah, very much so. I think that you click with the person immediately, and that was one of the men. He was a no-nonsense man, and not any unnecessarily frills or trimmings to his personality. A very straightforward, forthright worker. One felt very extremely easy with him. We got along very well, came even personally very, very close, and beyond a certain point, work becomes a given factor, it's fixed. But there is a lot of personal hobnobbing, and one acquires certain social intimacies and long-standing friendships. Bimala was, and I happen to be, I consider myself fortunate that I had a very good circle of friends within the cinema who endeavored to do good work, and they thought that was precious to them. In an atmosphere which was becoming increasingly mercenary, that was a very fortunate factor.
But you were very young, say in your 20s, and he must have been in his 50s. So wasn't there a big age gap for you to click with him?
Well, when I took up Devdas, I think it was about 28 or 27. And there was an age gap, but you see, Bimala would be more or less like Nitin Bose. Mr. Bose had a very sound academic grounding. I mean, these are the people who work not just with a story, but they not just develop a screenplay. And they are the people who chalk out an approach to the visual rendering, which is called the scenario. one of the very few people who had the scenario of a script done. If not on paper, on their mind. They had Bimal would even construct his set as per the visuals that he had in mind, and that provided him with a lot of economy. Unfortunately, there was lesser sensitivity in the governments or the authorities to these great men. I call them great men because they are the pioneers in a manner of speaking. They either consolidated a new grammar that was initiated by Devki Bose or by Barua, and probed further into it. At that time we felt that perhaps we will achieve depth and fluency of work which is there in the selective efforts of other picture makers in other parts of the world. But they got bogged down. They bogged down because not that the cinema does not earn. The cinema earned maybe 8 or 10 times as much. But what filters into the production sector was the question. It is the undoing of the entire industry. Bimal was aware of it because he was a part of a very excellent aesthetic setup in new theatres, and he could see the disintegration of new theatres at the increasing demands that are there at the box office. And eventually he reluctantly came to Bombay, quite reluctantly. I met him at that stage because he was there with Mr. Hitan Chaudhary, who was the controller of productions of Bombay Talkies, a very dear friend and a very sensitive administrator that the cinema medium had. He tried to coordinate with him. It was at that juncture that I met with Mr. Bimal Roy first, and that was far before he made Naukri or even the film with late Balrajji.
Do Bigha Zamin.
Yes. So our association didn't just start with the film, but it had we had been friends for a length of time and got to know each other. And it was there that while doing this film, for instance, Naukri, I could hear the screenplay, not just the screenplay, but the scenario, that a man has the visual approach of what his frame is going to unfold from scene to scene. That was his strong point, and that is what gave him confidence also.
Do you think Devdas, since he shot the earlier PC Barua film, did he try to make it very different from the PC Barua film? Did you both
No such obsession was there with him to be very particularly different. I do not know what prompted him to pick up this subject, but we met and he asked me if I would do it, because he said that if you do it, then I'd make it. Initially it was Nargis and Meena Kumari who were to play Chandramukhi and Parvati. But then something transpired, or something did not transpire, and these artists were not available, and then he shifted on to the new casting. I wanted to see what was done before in Devdas, but he didn't encourage me to see the previous Devdas. He said, Yusufbhai, you don't see it. Anyway, it's better sometimes that you don't see what it was. And I had read, of course, Devdas much before I started working in it, or the idea emerged. I had read it, I had admired the great writer and his works. Devdas was one of them, and while making, I did not get the feeling, because we just reacted to the book that was there and the script as was drawn from the basic story material. But I had not seen a print of Devdas coming, or Barwa's Devdas. These earlier Devdas, I think, was made by Barwa. Yes, I think so. But we never saw anything. He wasn't very much...
With Devdas, did you find that you got into this tragic image of the tragedy king, as it were, and it gave a certain pathos to your image, which continued for a while.
Yeah, I'd done a few films like Shaheed and Mela and Andaz, which all had tragic endings, and so was Devdas. But Devdas was a very rewarding experience because, first of all, it was excellent literary matter. A film has to be as good as the literary matter, and here was excellent literary material. And then it had a creative man who tried to transplant it onto the celluloid with a great measure of accuracy.
Psychologically, didn't the character get to you?
It would. If you get too seriously involved in it, it can drive you sick. So we would do Devdas inside and play vigorous cricket outside. We had a tennis ball and a chair, and some good cricketers were there in the unit. And the tendency of a sad character or a tragic character to grow, particularly if it is in a very profound setup, there is a tendency that it grows on you. But I don't think that I was carried away. Although people only desired to see me because distributors would. I found that whenever there was a proposition, they would ask, say, Dilip Sahab, are you going to die in this film? And if I said no, then they were disappointed. When I did Aan, for instance, they were disappointed that this man doesn't die in the end. But that's the phase which had to be balanced with certain lighter work, otherwise you get branded as a sad man.
Do you think a Bimal Roy could exist today in the 80s?
Very tough for him with his approach and with his sense of values, because he was a very academic man, and cinema, which used to get about 8 to 10% of the revenue at the box office, today hardly gets about 4%, even not 4.5% at an average. So it will be very difficult for that kind of picture making to survive unless somebody did something about it. You see, you can't judge man like Bimal Roy or so many others with the same barometer. You can't have a uniform, callous matrix of taxation on all products, or even on quality of yarn their excise changes. But on this thing there is just one yardstick, and this revenue draws its yardstick from the amount of money that they have to collect. They're not much concerned about the quality, and quality means underwriting certain box office. So on that criteria, most of our institutions went. I mean, Bombay Talkies, Prabhat, and various other new theatres, all these institutions disintegrated by and by. But it would be difficult. It would certainly be difficult to make do with the piracy on one side and with the kind of films that are being projected. I mean, they're designed to cater to the lowest common denominator, and that's not a very agreeable atmosphere for making selective films, good films.
Don't you think Devdas could click even today?
It would be a hypothetical question for us to debate upon, so I would not venture an opinion beyond what I have already said.
Do you think his films were artistic, commercial, a blend between the two?
Yes. He had an eye on this, that because every good picture maker suffers when his film does not succeed, and it doesn't detract from the quality of work that he may have done. But Bimal had suffered, and he wanted to steer away from these difficulties. because each one of us has to borrow money. And when you stretch out your hand, there is no institution that you are stretching it out to, but individuals, men who give you money on interest. That's the most painful job for a creative filmmaker, to go through, when he has to stretch out money to individuals. There are no banking facilities, there weren't any at that time, and that was painful. There is a lot that has been said on this subject, and Bimal was also one of the victims of this cruel system. I think these pressures, in a way, were responsible for his premature death. Apart from a picture maker, he was to me an embodiment of all that's good and decent in a man. That's very important, because a man with a making good products and containing fame with good grace, and yet being able to communicate on even level, being able to appreciate. I remember I was making a film, Ganga Jamna, and that was in Bhojpuri language, in which everybody was discouraging me. He was sitting in the rushes to see the rushes also, and after everybody was gone, Bimal came out and he told me in Bengali that this is going to be a great film, very good film. Don't lose confidence in it. So I told him, I also smiled, I said, no, I won't. I'll carry on. You have such men who are there with you in a moment of grief, just standing by you. We were just opposite to each other. There's Mohan Studios, so I used to shuttle between his office in Mohan Studios and Mughal Azam's office.